I woke up with a raw throat and a spine that felt like it had been stitched together with fire. The hospital room was too bright for the kind of pain I was in. The overhead lights turned every surface into a glare. Machines breathed and beeped like they owned the air. My mouth tasted like plastic, my tongue thick, my hands trembling as if they were trying to crawl away from my body. I tried to shift just an inch, and my back answered with a sharp, punishing bolt that made my eyes water instantly. A nurse noticed me blinking and rushed over, voice gentle, practiced. She asked me to rate my pain, asked if I knew where I was, asked if I could wiggle my toes. I did what she asked because I needed to prove I still existed. When she finally stepped back, I reached for my phone on the bedside table, desperate for something familiar. The screen lit up. 73 missed calls. Most from Mom, a few from Dad, a cluster from my sister Sloane, and a handful from numbers I did not recognize. My stomach tightened with the kind of dread you feel before a car accident, that horrible certainty that something is already happening and you are too late to stop it. I scrolled, thumb clumsy, and tapped the first voicemail from my father. His voice came through calm, almost cheerful, like he was leaving a message about groceries. "Avery, sweetheart, you are out of surgery now, right? Good. Listen, we made a decision while you were under. We sold your condo. It had to be done quickly. Sloane's wedding is coming up, and we needed the funds. You will understand later. Call me when you are awake." For a second, my brain refused to translate the words into meaning. Sold your condo? Needed the funds? You will understand later? I stared at the wall across from my bed, the beige paint and the crooked shadow of the curtain rail. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears, loud and stupid. The condo was not just property. It was 8 years of overtime and skipped vacations and saying no when my friend said yes. It was my proof, my small square of safety in Portland, Oregon, where nobody could tell me what I owed them. A nurse asked if I was all right. I nodded because the alternative was screaming. Another voicemail, this time from Mom. "Honey, do not make this harder than it has to be. Your father and I did what any parents would do. Sloane only gets married once, and you have always been so independent. You will bounce back. You always do." Independent. That word had followed me my entire life like a compliment with teeth. When I was 16 and begged them to come to my school play, Mom said she could not because Sloane had a photo shoot for her dance team. When I graduated college, Dad missed the ceremony because Sloane had a weekend trip with friends and he did not want her to drive alone. When I landed my first real job, my parents did not ask how it felt. They asked if I could help pay for Sloane's apartment deposit because she was stressed and needed support. And every time I swallowed the sting, someone would pat me on the shoulder and call me strong. I was strong because I had no choice. Now I lay in a hospital bed, barely able to sit up, and they had reached into my life while I was unconscious and taken the one thing I had built without them. I tried to call Dad. My fingers shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. It rang twice before going to voicemail. Sloane texted as if she were sending a party update. "Hey sis, you are awake? Thank God. Dad told you, right? Please do not freak out. We can talk later. I love you." Love you. I imagined her in a bright dressing room somewhere, holding up fabric swatches, smiling at her reflection, surrounded by people telling her she deserved the best day of her life. I imagined my parents nodding along, proud of themselves for pulling it off, relieved they had found a way to make it all happen without sacrificing their comfort. And I realized something cold and clear. They did not do this to me by accident. They did it because they truly believed they could. The nurse returned with medication and asked if I wanted to call someone. I almost laughed. Who would I call? The family that had just proved again that I was not a daughter to them. I was a resource. I waited until the nurse left, then I opened my contacts and scrolled past my parents, past Sloan, past the friends who would only tell me to breathe and take the high road. I tapped a name I had never once mentioned at family dinners. Caleb Price. The phone rang, once, twice. When he answered, his voice was steady, like a door being unlocked. Caleb speaking. I swallowed, tasting metal and anger. My name is Avery Collins, I said, and my parents just sold my home while I was in surgery. There was a pause, brief but heavy. Then he said, "All right, Avery, start from the beginning and tell me exactly how far you want to take this." I stared at the ceiling, at the two bright lights and the shadowed corners, and for the first time since I woke up, my pain did not feel like the worst thing in the room. "I am going to take it all the way," I said, "and their wedding in Bend is in 3 weeks." Caleb's voice lowered, calm and certain. "Then we have a deadline." And in that moment, while my family celebrated what they had stolen, I began building the trap that would spring in front of everyone they had invited to witness their perfect day. The next morning, the pain woke me before the sun did. It was a slow, ugly kind of pain, the kind that settled into your bones and made time feel thick. A nurse helped me sit up. I learned to breathe around the ache, to let it crest and pass without fighting it. Every movement reminded me of what my body had been through, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years, because betrayal has a way of turning the world into hard edges. Caleb came to the hospital that afternoon. He didn't bring flowers or pity. He brought a slim black folder, a yellow legal pad, and the kind of calm that made you feel like panic had no place to land. He asked for facts, not feelings. Dates, names, documents. Who had keys? Who had access to my email? Who knew my social security number? Who could have found my closing paperwork? I told him what I knew. My condo in the Pearl District, the mortgage paid on time, no intention to sell, no listing, no realtor, no warning, just a voicemail while I was still coming out of anesthesia. Caleb listened, then said, there are only a few ways they could move that fast. He made a call from the chair beside my bed and spoke to someone in a low voice I couldn't hear fully. When he hung up, he looked at me with an expression that was almost apologetic. They didn't list it, he said. They sold it as a quick close. Cash buyer, title transferred yesterday. My stomach twisted. Yesterday, I was unconscious. I know, he tapped the folder, and the signature used wasn't yours, at least not by you. The room felt suddenly smaller. My hands went cold. How did they do it? I asked. Caleb's eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. Do you have any kind of power of attorney set up? Medical proxy? Anything your parents could argue gives them authority? I remembered the stack of hospital forms shoved at me in pre-op, the way the nurse said, just standard paperwork, the way my mother smiled too brightly and held the pen poised in my hand like she was helping a child. There was something, I said slowly, a medical authorization, in case something went wrong. Caleb exhaled like he'd expected it. Then they used that as a lever. It may not hold up legally for a property sale, but it can be used to intimidate a rushed notary or a sloppy title agent. Sloppy, rushed, intimidated. Those words sounded like excuses for theft. I reached for my phone and opened my messages. Mom's latest text was waiting like a slap. Stop being dramatic. We did what we had to do. You'll get over it. Sloan is under so much stress. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Caleb watched me, then asked, do you want to try to unwind the sale? I looked at him. Can I? He didn't lie. It's hard. If the buyer is innocent and the paperwork clears, courts don't like ripping property away. You may be able to pursue damages, go after the notary, the title company, your parents, but the condo itself may be gone. Gone. A piece of my life erased and handed to someone else because my family decided my work belonged to them. The anger that rose in me wasn't explosive. It was colder than that. It was clean. I called my mother while Caleb sat quietly, letting me choose my own words. She answered on the third ring, breathless, as if I had interrupted something important. "Avery," she said, voice tight, "I told you we can talk later." "I want the truth now," I said. A pause. Then the familiar tone of correction, like she was teaching me manners. "The truth is, we're family. Family helps each other. Sloan deserves a proper wedding, and you and I don't," I cut in. She sighed, impatient. "Don't twist it. You don't need those things. You never did. You're always fine." Always fine. Always swallowing. Always surviving. I closed my eyes and saw my father's face as he said, "We sold your condo. You'll understand later." Like I was a child he could manage with a pat on the head. "Did Dad sign for me?" I asked. Mom's silence was the answer. Then she said, "We had to. You were out. Time was tight." Time was tight. Not for my recovery, not for my future. For a venue deposit, for flowers, for a dress. I opened my eyes and looked straight at Caleb, as if he could anchor me. "Mom," I said, voice quiet, steady, "do you know whose name is on that house?" She laughed, sharp and dismissively. "What are you talking about? Your father and I have lived here for 20 years. "That's not what I asked." "Avery, stop," she snapped. "Don't threaten us. We're your parents." I let my words fall with the weight of a door closing. "I'm not threatening you. I'm warning you. I'm coming to the wedding." Mom's breathing changed. "Good, you should. Everyone's been asking where you are." "Of course they have," I murmured. "You need me there to prove you didn't do anything wrong." Her voice went brittle. "We did nothing wrong, and if you make a scene—" "I won't," I said. "Not the way you think." I ended the call before she could answer. Caleb leaned forward slightly. "What was that?" I stared at the hospital window, at the pale gray sky over Portland, and felt something in me settle into place. "They don't know," I said. "Don't know what?" I spoke the secret I'd kept for 4 years, the one that had started as mercy and ended as a chain around my ankle. "They don't know whose name is on that house." Caleb didn't react dramatically. He simply nodded, eyes narrowing with understanding. "That," he said softly, "changes everything." And for the first time since I woke up, I could picture the moment my family would finally realize I wasn't their backup plan. I was the ground they were standing on. By the time they discharged me, I had learned how to walk again in small, humiliating increments. A cane, slow steps, measured breaths, pain that flared if I moved too fast, and a deeper pain that didn't care whether I sat or stood. I went home to an empty condo I no longer owned, so I stayed in a short-term rental Caleb arranged near his office, where the furniture smelled like someone else's life and the silence felt like judgment. Caleb didn't let me spiral. He gave me structure. "We don't win this by shouting," he said. "We win it by being unshakable." He built a timeline on a legal pad: surgery date, time of sale, names of the signing parties, notary stamp, title company, the cash buyer, the transfer filing. He pulled every public record he could get his hands on, and when something didn't line up, he circled it in red like a target. "Here," he said one evening, tapping the paper. They used urgency as a weapon. The faster they moved, the less anyone asked questions. "Can we prove it wasn't me?" I asked. "We can prove you were under anesthesia. We can prove you weren't physically present. We can prove the medical authorization was misused. And we can prove pattern," he said, eyes steady on mine. "But you need witnesses, not just documents." That's when I called the only person in my family who had ever loved me without requiring a performance. Aunt Marin answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. "I heard," she said before I could speak. Her voice was tight, controlled. "I'm so sorry." I expected awkward silence, polite sympathy. What I got was anger. "Your mother called me bragging," Marin continued. "She said, 'We finally got it handled,' like you were a problem they solved." My throat tightened. "Will you help me?" There was no hesitation. "Tell me what you need." I met her the next morning at a quiet diner outside Salem, halfway between Portland and where my parents lived. She arrived in a worn denim jacket, hair pulled back, eyes sharp. She didn't ask how I was. She looked at the cane, then looked at my face, and her expression hardened, like she'd made a decision years ago and just never had the chance to act on it. "I saw them pressure you before surgery," she said. "Your mom told you to sign quickly. Your dad stood behind her like a guard." "Would you say that under oath?" I asked. Merrim's mouth tightened. Gladly. Back at Caleb's office, he added her name under one word: credibility. The next piece was harder. I needed evidence that wasn't filtered through my eyes, so I did what I had avoided my whole life. I went looking for the truth in the places my family thought were harmless. Sloane's social media. She'd posted a bright, teary video. "My sister's been going through a lot, and I'm praying for her," she said, voice soft and saintly. The comments were a flood of hearts and praise. Then a second post, more pointed. "Sometimes family members try to ruin your joy when they can't stand seeing you happy." My name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. Caleb watched me scroll, screenshot after screenshot, the dates stamped clearly in the corner. "This is good," he said. "She's building a public narrative. We'll use it." "For what?" I asked. "To show motive, to show entitlement, to show they weren't acting out of emergency. They were acting out of belief," he said. "Belief that you'd swallow it." I swallowed hard. "I don't want to fight online." "You won't," Caleb said. "Silence is a strategy. Let them talk. Every word becomes a receipt." 2 weeks before the wedding, my mother finally called with what she thought was a victory. "We're doing rehearsal dinner at the resort in Bend," she said, brisk. "We need you there. People keep asking, and don't show up with that attitude." I kept my voice neutral. "I'll be there." She exhaled like she'd won. "Good. And wear something nice. Don't embarrass your sister." After I hung up, Caleb leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "They'll want a picture of you smiling," he said. "They'll want you to stand beside them and look grateful." "And if I refuse?" I asked. "They'll try to isolate you. They'll corner you. They'll make you feel guilty," he said. "So we prepare you for that. You say very little, you give them nothing to twist, and you keep the real conversation for the moment you control." He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. Inside were copies of key documents, proof I was in surgery during the sale, the questionable notary record, and, folded carefully like a blade hidden in cloth, the LLC paperwork tied to my parents' house. I stared at it, heart thudding. "Do I really bring this?" I asked. Caleb's gaze didn't waver. "You bring it because it reminds you who you are. You don't hand it over until the exact second you decide." That night, I stood in front of the mirror in the rental bathroom, practicing my own face. Calm, unreadable, not pleading, not angry, just done. The next morning, I booked my ticket to Bend, and before I closed my laptop, a new notification popped up on my phone, a message from Sloane. "Can't wait to see you. I hope you've learned to be supportive. Big day. Don't make it about you." I read it twice. Then I slipped Caleb's envelope into my bag and zipped it shut like I was sealing a promise. Because she was right about one thing. It was going to be a big day. And the moment they put a microphone in my hand, I wouldn't have to make it about me. I would make it about the truth. The resort in Bend looked like a postcard someone had polished too hard. A sheet of lake water spread behind the ceremony lawn, reflecting a sky that was aggressively blue. White chairs sat in perfect rows, lanterns hung from wooden beams. Soft music drifted from hidden speakers, the kind that made strangers smile at each other and believe in happy endings. I arrived early, cane in hand, my spine wrapped in a brace under a tailored navy dress. The dress wasn't for them, it was armor. Caleb had warned me, show up composed, not fragile. They only knew how to handle me when I was apologizing. My mother spotted me the moment I stepped into the lobby. Lorna swept forward, cheeks already flushed with performance. "There you are," she said, pulling me into a hug that was more for the people watching than for me. "Smile, people have been asking." My father, Trevor, came up behind her with the same careful grin he used when he wanted something to look normal. He clasped my shoulder, fingers firm, like he could anchor me in place. "You look good, Ave," he said. "See, you bounced back." Bounced back, as if my body hadn't been cut open, as if my life hadn't been looted. Sloane appeared a second later in a silk robe, hair half-pinned, glowing with that bridal electricity that makes everyone treat you like gravity bends around you. She held out her hands and squealed softly. "Oh my God, you made it," she said. Her eyes flicked to my cane, then away quickly like it was an inconvenient prop. "I was so worried you'd be, upset." I met her smile with a smaller one. "I'm here." She leaned closer, voice dropping. "Just be normal today, okay? Don't do anything weird. Grant's family is very traditional." Traditional. Another word for image obsessed. Another word for we will judge you if you ruin the picture. The ballroom filled as afternoon slid toward evening. Guests moved in bright clusters, laughing, sipping champagne, hugging like they hadn't been holding grudges 5 minutes ago. I saw cousins who hadn't returned my calls in years. I saw neighbors who used to praise my parents for raising such a successful family. None of them had called when I went into surgery. None of them knew they'd been invited to a lie. Caleb wasn't with me. That was part of the plan. He stayed close enough to arrive when needed, far enough that no one could accuse me of orchestrating a courtroom. What I carried in my bag looked like nothing, a simple clutch. Inside, the envelope felt heavier than the cane. I kept to the edges, watching, letting them believe they'd won. At sunset, the ceremony began. Sloane walked down the aisle like she'd rehearsed her whole life for this moment. Grant stood at the altar, handsome, tense, eyes shining with devotion. His parents sat in the front row with expressions carved from money and caution. When the vows ended and applause rose, my mother's hand flew to her mouth in a sob that sounded practiced. My father wiped his eyes with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had pulled off something brilliant. They looked at me like I was supposed to be grateful. Later, during the reception, Trevor clinked a glass for attention. The room quieted as he stepped to the microphone, beaming. "Tonight," he said, "we're celebrating love, family, and new beginnings. And before we eat, I want to invite someone special to say a few words. My eldest daughter, Avery." The spotlight found me like a finger pointing. I felt my mother's gaze sharpen, a warning, a command. Be good. Sloane turned in her chair, smile stretched wide, eyes glittering with nervous excitement. She wanted this, proof that I was obedient, proof that everything was fine. I rose slowly. The cane tapped the floor once, then again, each sound landing in the quiet like a countdown. Faces turned. Conversations died. Someone whispered my name as if it belonged to a story they'd heard but never confirmed. I reached the front and took the microphone. It was warm from my father's hand. I held it lightly, not as a weapon, but as a truth teller. "I'm Avery Collins," I began, voice steady, "and I'm the sister of the bride." A ripple of polite laughter, relief. They thought it would be a sweet toast. I had surgery 2 weeks ago, a spinal procedure that lasted nearly 10 hours. The air shifted. A few people murmured sympathy. When I woke up, I said, I had a voicemail from my father. He told me that while I was under anesthesia, my parents sold my home. Silence dropped hard. My mother's smile froze. My father's face drained so fast it was almost impressive. Sloane's champagne flute stopped halfway to her mouth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I used my medical authorization, I said, and they did it to pay for this wedding. Gasps scattered like thrown pebbles. Grant's head turned sharply toward Sloane. His mother's posture stiffened. His father's expression sharpened into something colder than anger. My father took a step toward me, hand out, as if he could physically take the words back. "Avery," he hissed, too soft for most to hear. "Stop." I looked at him with a calm that felt like stepping onto solid ground for the first time in years. I'm not here to ruin anything. I'm here to correct the story. I opened my clutch and pulled out the envelope, paper edges crisp and certain. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the proof." My mother stood abruptly, chair scraping. "Avery, please," she pleaded, voice breaking in a way I'd heard 100 times when she wanted to control a room. "Here. Here is exactly where," and I turned slightly so the front tables could see. "And since we're talking about property," I added, letting the next words fall like a match into gasoline, "there's something else my parents never told anyone." Every head leaned in. Even the DJ seemed to stop breathing. I met my mother's eyes, then my father's, and smiled once. Small, sharp, final. They don't actually own the house they've been living in for the last 4 years. The room didn't just go quiet. It went weightless, and as my father's mouth opened in horror, I pulled out a second document from the envelope, one with a bold header and my parents' names typed beneath it, ready to let the real shock land. For a moment, nobody moved. Not the guests with their champagne flutes suspended midair, not the servers frozen with trays tilted in their hands, not even the photographer, whose finger hovered over the shutter as if afraid to capture the wrong reality. My father's face looked like it had been stripped of its script. My mother's lips parted, then pressed together again, like she was trying to swallow the sound of her own panic. Sloane sat perfectly still, eyes wide, the bride suddenly reduced to a spectator. Grant stood up slowly. His chair legs scraped the floor, sharp in the silence. He didn't look at me at first. He looked at Sloane, then at my parents, then back at me as if he needed to confirm I wasn't a rumor. "What do you mean they don't own their house?" he asked, voice controlled, but not gentle. I held the second document up high enough for the front tables to see. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was just ink on paper, the kind of ink that changes lives. 4 years ago, I said, my parents were about to lose their home. They were behind. They were scared. They didn't tell the family because they didn't want anyone to know. My mother shook her head hard, pleading with her eyes. Don't. I kept my voice even. I bought the house through an LLC, quietly. I did it so they could stay, so they wouldn't be humiliated. I asked for nothing. They never knew, or they never bothered to ask. My father's hands trembled. "Avery," he whispered, "please." I looked at him, really looked. A man who had spent decades treating me like an emergency fund with a heartbeat. A man who could say "sweetheart" and steal from me in the same breath. "I'm not telling this story to punish you," I said. "I'm telling it because you built your whole life on the assumption that I would always take it." Grant's mother leaned toward her husband, voice low, angry. I saw her mouth one word, disgusting. Sloane finally found her voice, thin and frantic. "That's not true. We didn't know about the house. We didn't. And the condo, Dad said it was temporary. He said you'd be paid back." I turned my head toward her, slow. Paid back with what, Sloan? With more lies? With another promise that disappears the second you get what you want? Tears sprang into her eyes, perfectly timed. For the first time, I watched people not rush to comfort her. The room had shifted. The spell was broken. Grant took one step back from Sloan, then another. His gaze moved across the tables, across his family, across the guests, as if he was seeing the wedding from above, a scene he no longer recognized. "I can't do this," he said quietly. Sloan jolted to her feet. "Grant, don't, please." Grant's jaw flexed. "If you can watch your sister come out of surgery and let them sell her home, what do you do to someone you don't love?" That sentence cut cleaner than any scream. My father lunged toward me, not in anger, but in panic, like he could snatch the truth out of the air and put it back in my mouth. "We'll fix it," he said, voice cracking. "We'll fix everything. Avery, you don't understand what you're doing." I lowered the papers. My hands were steady. "I understand exactly what I'm doing." My mother stepped closer, mascara threatening to run, and for a second she looked like the woman who used to tuck a blanket around me when I had a fever. Then her expression hardened again, and I saw the truth. She didn't miss me. She missed control. "You're going to throw your family away over money," she said, bitter. I let the words hang a beat. Then I answered softly so it landed deeper. "You threw me away first. I'm just finally picking myself up." I didn't stay to watch the collapse spread. I didn't need to see the cake uneaten, the dance floor empty, the guests leaving in stiff clusters, whispering as they walked. I had already won the only thing that mattered. On Monday, Caleb filed the notices, a formal demand for damages related to the unauthorized sale, a complaint that put the notary and the title company on alert, and a legal termination of my parents' occupancy. When my father called, his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Where are we supposed to go?" "You're supposed to go where people go when they can't take from their children anymore," I said. "You're supposed to figure it out." The line went silent, and I realized I wasn't shaking. My recovery was slow, painful, unromantic, but each day I walked a little farther, not just on my healing spine, but away from the version of myself that believed love meant endurance. Some people called me cruel. Some called me brave. Most didn't know what to call a woman who finally stops paying for everyone else's comfort. I didn't need their label. I had my life back. If this story hit you in the chest, if you've ever been treated like the strong one because someone else wanted to stay weak, tap like, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe to Waters Payback for the next story.